Open, outspoken, it's ophthalmology off the grid, an honest look at controversial topics in the field. I'm Blake Williamson. Hello and welcome to another episode of Ophthalmology Off the Grid. I'm Dr. Blake Williamson. Today I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Darrell E, founder of Sky Vision Centers in Westlake, Ohio. Our guest for this episode is Dr. Preeya Gupta, who recently joined the ranks as a private practitioner with her practice, Triangle Eye Consultants in the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina. Darrell and I share experiences and the many reasons for going into private practice, and Preeya talks about her journey to founding a private practice of her own. She discusses her decision to leave academia, why she decided to take a leap of faith on her own, and the importance of setting expectations when you're first starting out. More of her story coming up on Off the Grid.
Support for this podcast comes from Bryn Mawr Communications. BMC produces a number of informative podcast series spanning a variety of topics in ophthalmology. Discover a new show at itube.net/podcasts.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Ophthalmology Off the Grid. I'm your host, Dr. Blake Williamson, and I am here with my new co-host for the next 3 episodes. I'm so pumped about this. Do you ever, for you guys listening, do you ever, meet someone that you instantly recognize is a little better or a lot better at just about everything that you do when it comes to podcasting? I mean, the guy's got the voice, he's got the gravitas, he's got the content, he's kind of got it all. And I've admired him from afar and from up close over the past 5 years. And it's amazing to me that it's taken this long for me to wrangle him into doing this with me. But my guy from Ohio, Dr. Darrell E. Darrell, how are you doing?
Blake, I'm doing great. I'm going to have to recover here. I need time to pull out my napkins and dab my eyes. I mean, that was one of the nicest introductions I've ever had. Thank you very much. I was telling someone asked me what I was doing tonight. And I said, well, so there's these 2 of the really cool kids invited me to come to their party tonight. And I don't know why they want to hang out with me. I mean, I'm like the silver fox. I'm the old dude, and it's almost ready to be put out to pasture. And here, the cool kids said, "Hey, dude, come on out and play." So thank you, Blake. I'm thrilled to be here.
I remember being in Mexico for Thanksgiving, and I was listening to your podcast. I think it was on 50-second lasers or something like that. And the kids were trying to talk to me. My wife was trying to talk to me. And I was like texting you how much I love the podcast. She's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm just texting Darrell about his podcast." She was like, "We're in Mexico and it's Thanksgiving. Like, what's wrong with you?" And that's when I knew I had to get you on the podcast. So I'm so glad to have you on hosting with me for the next 3 episodes. And the first thing we talked about with topics is, sort of making the case for private practice. And you said, we got to get Preeya. And I was like, well, we probably can't get Preeya. Preeya's busy. But we're going to try to get her in and for a lot of reasons that we're going to learn about tonight. But maybe introduce sort of the topic and introduce our guest for tonight.
Well, I'm thrilled to introduce Preeya Gupta, who has recently joined the ranks of the private practitioners. And one of the great joys of having gotten back into consulting and speaking for me has been meeting Preeya. We met, 7, 8 years ago, just before a meeting with Shire when we were doing the Zyder project. And our mutual friend, Bob Dempsey, had said to me, Darrell, you're not going to believe this. I got Preeya. Preeya's going to come and she's going to talk to us. It's just, it's awesome. It's going to be such a wicked pisser. I can't believe that we got here. And so I bumped into Preeya after the reception. We may or may not have been at the bar having a drink. And I told her, "Bob, it's so good to see you." And she's looking at, who the hell is this old dude? And over the last, 7 or 8 years, we've had a ton of chances to get together. And during her journey, thinking about going to private practice, I was so very flattered that she reached out and asked some questions. So let me introduce my great good friend and Blake's great good friend, Preeya Gupta, late of Duke University and now in the vanguard of private practice in North Carolina. Preeya.
Thank you guys. Gosh, what a great introduction. And Blake, when you were talking about, when you meet someone and they just do everything like so much better, I was like, oh man, I'm thinking about the two of you. You guys are the kings of podcasting, and I'm honored to be here tonight. Thanks.
Well, awesome. Well, let's kick it off. We're living in a world which is so very, very different from when I went into practice. And Blake, your dad and I are pretty close in age. And so we entered practice at similar times and similar eras. And when I went into practice, 80% of ophthalmologists were actually private practitioners. Some of them were lone wolves. Many of us were in practices that were of varying different sizes, but almost nobody was in anything that you would think of as a corporate group. And the people who were not in private practice were in academia. And over the years, things have changed dramatically in the world as a whole. But for those people in private practice, it really hasn't changed a whole lot. And the biggest question that I have really doesn't apply to you guys. And it's to the folks who, for whatever reason, have left private practice. I'm thinking, you're leaving the Garden of Eden. Why are you going? Where are you going? What are you doing? So let me start off, Blake, with you, because you've been in private practice for 6 years now, if I remember correctly. And you had all kinds of options when you left your residency, but you had a really cool option because you had a family connection and a really, really deep tie to the area. So walk Preeya and me through the decision-making process. Walk us through a little bit of how you made something which everybody on the outside probably looks at as just, oh, of course, what else is we going to do? But it had to be more complex than that. Give us a little Reader's Digest view of what that process was like.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked a lot about this in the past. I had a bit of a rocky start in high school. I had a problem with authority, believe it or not, and I went to
Shocking.
Yeah, I went to 3 high schools in 4 years. I graduated with a 3.8 GPA, so I always had good grades, but otherwise had issues. And my dad sat me down after the second school and said, "Hey, man, we need to get you on a path, or else like all this goes away. There's no car, there's no going out, there's no friends, there's no nothing. You need to be on a path towards success. It doesn't have to be medicine, but it just has to be something. I need to see you growing and going towards a path of success." So I said, "Well, I guess I'll just go to medical school." I just said that at the time just to appease him, of course. But what I found out as I continued that course through college and finally got through medical schools, that ophthalmology was absolutely, there was just nothing that touched it. So for me, I had an open mind, and believe it or not, even though I'm surrounded by ophthalmologists in my family, there's just nothing that came close. The challenge that I had, if I'm being honest, is sort of the burden of living underneath someone who casts a big shadow. Okay, and how do I differentiate myself and not just be my father's son, but be my own surgeon? And so for my first 5 years in practice, that's what it was all about. I busted my butt, trying to do as many cases as I could, do as many studies as I could. If I had speaking opportunities, I would try to do a great job with that. Networking, all those things, just to kind of become my own man. And sort of that's what I did. And I would say that private practice afforded me that opportunity. If I was at a place like Duke, for instance, which I'm sure Duke would never hire me, but if they would, there's so many amazing rock stars there. It's hard to kind of plant your flag, right? Well, in private practice, I had the opportunity to do that, and it turns out if you do a lot of cases and do them well, companies will want to work with you. And if you can talk, talk a little bit about what the technologies are, well, even better. And so for me, that's kind of how I got my start. And I think private practice kind of afforded me those opportunities.
Yeah, great story. It's super, super story. So Preeya, your journey to private practice was different from Blake's and mine. I went straight into private practice after leaving NYU and really had no interest in being in academia. I had my fill at, maybe it's because I trained at Bellevue. It's easy to get your fill of anything in a place like Bellevue. But after you finished your training, you started off going into academia. And I wonder if you can share just a little bit of that, because it's a nice preamble to what everybody is going to learn. It's just a really, really great story of how you've, rejoined or joined our world. So what was the thought process when you finished training? And tell us a little bit about the journey that brought you to Duke.
Well, great question. So I spent the first decade of my career in academics, actually. So I was a resident at Duke, and then did my cornea and refractive fellowship with Minnesota Eye Consultants, Dick Lindstrom, Tom Samuelson, Liz Davis, Dave Harden.
It's a shame you couldn't have gotten a better fellowship. You had no idea that you had been so handicapped by your fellowship. You've overcome that, though.
I lived at home for a year because I'm from Minnesota. It was pretty funny to be like, hey, Mom and Dad, are you guys ever coming back? Like, where are you guys? It's like 10 p.m. But, and then I joined the faculty at Duke, and, I look at the first 10 years of my career very fondly. It was, I would say, some of the major mentors in my life actually came from fellowship. And in fellowship, I feel like, what I really loved is, Minnesota Eye is a private practice that's so academically oriented. They're involved with a multitude of clinical trials. They're, on the bleeding edge of new technology, et cetera. And so, kind of in my mind, I've always had that as like maybe an ideal environment where you, have a nice mix of a robust clinical practice, some autonomy and independence, but still, a manageable enough like group of people. So kind of that critical mass where everyone learns from one another. And, I went into academics, and part of it was because, of course I have a love of learning, and, my forte always was clinical medicine. And so a lot of the research I did was clinically oriented research. And I think academics was great for me because it really allowed me to create a niche for myself to, in a supported way, develop an expertise. And I think one of the nice things about academics is that collaborative environment. You have residents, fellows, fellow attendings, different subspecialties. And so there's something very warm and inviting about an academic institution and environment, certainly the first number of years of your career. And so, that's kind of how I ended up in academics. And, in being in an environment where you're allowed to grow and change, I think is what kept me in academics for so long. But I think ultimately, maybe some of your ability to grow and changes over time. And that's ultimately what helped me kind of make a shift and change. And, today I still am very academically involved. We've only been out for a year, but we're involved with clinical trials and clinical practice. And so I feel like I'm a step closer to, kind of emulating some of my core mentors, and have been pleasantly surprised that, yes, even though I'm doing this a decade later, that, I still love that environment. And I love being able to kind of be in that hybrid environment, if you will.
That's awesome. Let's stay with the beginning of our journeys just for a couple of minutes. I actually have gone into private practice twice. I went into private practice right out of my residency, joined a group, ended up running the group, and then left the group and started cold. And my second entry into private practice was very much like your entry, Preeya, where you left your previous practice home. Yours happened to be academics. Mine was in a relatively large single specialty group, not unlike Blake's, not quite as big as Blake's, but similar to it. And then I went out on my own. And I was, what was I? I was 45 when I did that. So a little older than you, lot older than you, much older than you at 45. But
There you go, Darrell.
So those of you who are listening don't know that we can see each other. You can't see us. And the look of horror on Preeya's face when I said, just a little older than you. Anyway,
there's a few gray, don't worry.
Yeah, I remember this, going out the second time, and feeling how different it was. Because when I launched the practice that we now call Sky Vision, I had no patients, I had no patient lists, I had no contracts. I was forbidden from contacting our prior any of our relationships, and that was all contractual. And I knew that was there. There was nothing devious or nefarious about that arrangement. And I went into the second launching of private practice with eyes open, knowing that. And it was a little bit daunting. And your entry into private practice is more like my second entry, whereas my first entry, Blake, was actually a lot like yours. I was going to an established practice, which was run by my senior partner, who was 11 years older than I. Brilliant manager. I mean, just a great business person, in addition to being a great surgeon. And then I was on my own with a couple of optometrists. And it had to be daunting, Preeya, thinking about it. You were staying home just like I did and going into the community in a different role. What was it like emotionally? What did it feel like? I mean, we know the nuts and bolts, but, share, what did you feel like when you were doing that?
Darrell, I think it's just someone, and I really wish I knew who said this to me, probably more than one person, because, it requires hearing something more than once to have it stick in your brain. But, hearing the phrase, if you don't take a leap of faith on yourself, who else are you going to take a leap of faith on? That it really is a leap of faith, right? You don't know if you start a practice, if patients will come to you. When you're leaving out of an institution, you often think like, oh, the institution, gave me my brand and my, reputation. But really it's ultimately, people come to see you because they like you, they trust you because you've done a good job, or, a referral or a friend. And ultimately, the emotion behind leaving is, of course, there's a sadness, like you're leaving something that you've known for a long time, but there's also a little bit of, nervousness of like, am I good enough to do this? Like, is it going to work? And I think ultimately, I mean, this might sound bad, but like sort of not worrying about any of that is how I approached the first, 4 to 6 months, because I mean, it could be paralyzing, right? The ruminating of the what if, or I got to do this, I got to do that. And at some point you just have to believe in yourself. Gosh, that sounds so cheesy, right? Oh, just believe in yourself. But really you actually do just have to, set some boundaries for yourself. I'm not going to, I'm going to measure success by X or Y, and those could be small things. Like if I saw 10 patients today, I'm going to be super pumped. Or, if my staff is still really happy 6 weeks in, or, whatever it is that, setting your expectations appropriately in the beginning, I think is really important just for yourself, because, we're all overachievers. We're all, we all have friends and colleagues that are, running these amazing practices, and you kind of, you have to resist the temptation to compare yourself to others and sort of create your own identity and your own version of what success is to you. Because, some people leave because of financial implications. Some people leave because of autonomy. Some people leave because they want just different balance in their life. And so there isn't a right metric, in my personal opinion. I think it really is something that you have to reflect upon to decide, hey, why, if you want to make a change, ask yourself why you want to make a change. What is it that you want to change? And if, leaving and starting your own practice is the right answer, you have to go into it knowing what is going to make you happy, because it's certainly not an easier path. There's many things that happen on a day-to-day basis that maybe, if you're in an environment in a large group or you're not paying attention to those things. Yeah. I always tell people it's the same amount of work. I'm just working on different things. And so, you have to yourself decide what of those things is going to make you happy.
Blake and I, I'm just going to say, Blake, you and I have talked about this. We've talked about one of the beautiful things about private practice is that we get to not only achieve our professional goals and help our teammates, if we happen to be in a bigger practice, achieve their goals, but we also have a much greater opportunity to look within and decide what our personal goals are. And I know that you've had a change not a change, but you've reevaluated your goals over time and have kind of done a tiny little bit of a reset. And it's super cool that all three of us are in different types of private practices, but we all have the opportunity to be a little bit more self-directed as we set those priorities. Share with Preeya and me a little bit about how you started to think about the role of practice in your life as a whole, and also how being in private practice allowed you to just be a little bit more in control of that process, because it's a great story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when I first started out, I was doing a whole lot of consulting. I feel like I was saying yes to many opportunities, and wanted to certainly be out there. And now that I've become an owner of the practice and the surgery center, that's all kind of shifted, and I find myself wanting to spend more times working on my business, as opposed to being out on the road. And I find myself doing less speaking engagements, going to fewer conferences. I'm still going to quite a bit, don't get me wrong, but I'm being more selective, and I'm only focusing on things that I truly am passionate about. At the same time that I was getting busier and busier with our practice, I mean, from a business sense, literally since I've started, we've gone from 4 locations to 7. I've literally hired almost 50 more employees. We're up to 192 employees, and 7 doctors, just in the past 5 years. And so it's hard to balance all that and try to be at every conference speaking about this lens or that MIGS device or whatever. So I've sort of readjusted and reevaluated what I find to be most important. And at the same time, having a family with 3 young kids, it's the real thing. My kids are 7, 3, and 2. So it's like, you'll be on a flight back home from, Frog Croak, Arkansas. Don't get mad at me, Arkansas. I love you, Arkansas. And you're asking yourself, like, what am I doing? Why am I out there talking about some eye drop or whatever? So I've really kind of changed, that in my life as well. And private practice has allowed me to sort of do all these things and have those opportunities and opportunities for ASC ownership and, hiring other doctors, and other optometrists that we employ, is fun. It's really great. The entrepreneurial aspect of what we do at this point has become my singular focus. Running the actual business, because it's a 24/7 job. As Preeya just said, it's not that you're spending just as much time. You're just doing other things. You're looking at P&L sheets, and you're doing HR and all that stuff that they don't teach us in med school. And it sounds like, oh, we can't do that. We're not trained to do that. But what you find after you do that for a short period of time is, in fact, you can do it. Oftentimes, the physician is the sharpest person in the room, and so we have the opportunity and the expertise to do that once you get your feet wet.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. And in private practice version 1.0, for me, of course, I joined a very strong physician businessman, and didn't have the I guess the obligation to be the only decision maker. Thankfully, there was a shared decision making atmosphere, so I was able to learn and grow. And I think joining an established practice, Blake, you've probably had that opportunity, and now are starting to purposefully and voluntarily take on some of the administrative roles. Your situation is a little bit different. It's kind of like my version 2.0, where it was just me and a very, very small group of very, very dedicated and loyal staff members. But it was very much a buck stops here kind of thing. It continues to be a buck stops here kind of thing. Were you surprised by that when you went out, or had you been kind of primed by a family member or friends? What was your prep time like? And when you got going, did that meet your expectations? Were there surprises? What was that like?
Darrell, it's such a good question. I think I would say that, I've had an amazing, like this past year has been amazing. And I really attribute most of that success to One, believing in yourself, right? Because not every moment is easy. And, yes, the first 20 times you read a P&L sheet, it's not so straightforward, but number 21 is going to be like, smooth sailing. But really it's the people that you surround yourself with that I think makes the day-to-day not only meaningful, but also supportive. And, I'm a big believer in creating that team around you that, you spend as much time at work as you do at home with your family often. And so that sort of success, is really, it's not just, my success, it's really because of the team, whether it's my technicians, my front desk, and just everybody kind of believing in one mission. But to, this, I would say that, when you ask about like, what was my learning curve? What was I primed for it? Really, after being in practice for 10 years, you pick up a lot of things along the way. First of all, if you choose to have your eyes open to these things when somebody else is sort of running a business for you. So I feel like I had a good basic understanding, but I've continued to be successful because, the billing person I hired is super amazing and will steer me clear out of, anything that, I might not know about a rule or a regulation. And, there's so many resources. You don't have to have everything in house these days. You can, outsource a lot of these things. And I think that the ease of access to all those things sort of decreases some of that learning curve, right? I don't have to be the number one expert in everything. I would like to be, and I strive to be, but I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not the best at. And so, I filled in those gaps with experts. But the other sort of, like, what did I do to prepare? I think more than anything else, you just have to set your expectations. Really. I mean, because if you're going to go home and worry about things every night, and if you're going to, like, yes, it's your new business, it's your baby, but, I feel like my priming, so to speak, was to level set, here's where I want to be at this time point. And here's my roadmap of, what's reasonable in terms of growth. And so those are the things that I maybe spent time on, and maybe helping to figure out some of the logistics of, okay, I'm going to do billing, who's going to do the telephones, and things like that. So I think in 2021, 2022, the amount of priming, so to speak, really can be less than maybe, when you started your 2.0 practice, and, maybe there wasn't a phone a biller and phone another person, but I do feel fortunate to have, those other resources.
What would you say was like maybe like your most important hire, one or two or three hires, for someone who's looking to make the jump? Like, who do they need to start researching, like who they want to hire?
Yeah, you have to have a very strong technician, like somebody that like isn't just learning how to refract. Like, it has to be somebody, because often I find that the technicians that have been like in the business for a while, they know the clinical, they know how to triage patient questions. They can deliver that customer service to the patient, they're an extension of your practice, but they also kind of need to understand some insurance. Like, so maybe the next, key number one and 1A would be a really good front desk person that has insurance experience. And maybe it's, between the two of them, they can figure it all out, but that's critical because I think the biggest, rudest awakening is really insurances, and, the time it takes to get on these plans, the loopholes, the hurdles we have to go through year to year to stay, in compliance and to understand how their rules are changing, I think is exhausting. And, it sort of, unfortunately, is a here to stay aspect of our current healthcare market. And so that's something that, you as a clinician, you can't be doing all of those things. So those would be my first couple of hires. Yeah. Darrell's saying he can't either.
So we've got a couple minutes left. Let's wrap this up with a call to action. All right, Blake, 1 minute, you're coming out of your residency. You should go into private practice in a big group. Go.
I think you should go into private practice because you can be anything that you want to be in that thing. One of the things about academics that I think would be cool is the opportunity to work with fellows and train the next generation. Well, guess what? In private practice, you can do that. There's a lot of private practice fellowships around the country. I actually was in one with my own dad. Research is cool too. They have those at research institutions, don't they? Well, guess what? They have those in private practices too. Turns out if you do a lot of cases, you can do these IITs and other studies that you can work with different technology companies and drug companies, whatever you want to do. But the most important thing is just the autonomy, being able to differentiate yourself, market yourself, grow your practice without having to ask this person and that person and go through all the red tape that you normally have to do at some institutions, not all institutions, but some institutions. So for me, it's been the only way to go. I'm completely biased, of course, but I'm excited to hear y'all's answers.
All right, Preeya, 1 minute. You're either coming out of fellowship, coming out of academia, you're coming out of your residency program. You should go into solo private practice because go.
I think you should go into solo private practice because you have the utmost autonomy and responsibility all in the same breath. And I think that for those that want to rise to the challenge and want to expand their horizons and learning not only, how to practice their clinical medicine at the highest level, but also, to me, it's a learning and growth opportunity to have truly the full control to make your practice what you want it to be. And I have to agree with Blake, the modern private practice, whether it's a solo practitioner or a large group practice, can truly be academic. You can be involved in clinical trials. You can have a fellow if you'd like. There are no shortage of people that are willing to learn and wanting to train. And if you, I think, are a kind, caring, and generous person with your time and your knowledge, you can make any private practice an academic private practice. And so I think that, you can be that unicorn if you choose to be.
Preeya, what should we ask Darrell? We got
to ask Darrell something.
What do you ask him? You ask him. What do you think, Preeya? What do you think? What do you want to ask him?
Darrell, you have been in 2 private practices. I would like you to name, regardless of which type of practice, both of your environments, what has been the hardest part about being in practice on your own? Because, so far we've only painted roses, as far as I can tell. What is the hardest part about being, either alone or in private practice in general? It's your choice.
The hardest part about being in any practice, especially private practice, is creating the culture that will allow you to thrive. If you don't create the culture, a culture will be created. A culture will come in. It just may not be the culture that you want. My question to myself was going to be, why should you stay in private practice? There's all kinds of money floating around. There are private equity companies that are circling. They're circling little practices like yours and mine, Preeya. There's definitely circling big behemoths like Blake's practice. Why should you stay in private practice? A really good friend of all of ours said to me one day when they were talking about their second or their third bite of the apple, and someone at the table asked me, well, you're 62 years old, Darrell. Why haven't you sold to private equity? And this doc, who we all know, said, there's only one culture in a private equity practice. Darrell, your practice and other folks like Vance's practice are known for the culture that they've created. I'm here to tell you that there's only going to be one culture, and it's not going to be yours. So the biggest challenge for me was creating the culture, not letting the culture be something that just happened on its own, because then you might get something that you really don't like. And if you've created a culture that allows you to thrive, that allows you to do all the things that the two of you have talked about, that allows you to express yourself, have confidence in yourself, build your own niche in a big setting where you can get buried and not allow that to happen. Once you've done that, it might not be invaluable, but it's incredibly valuable and something that should be cherished. And something that can keep you in private practice, perhaps for the rest of your career. I can honestly say at the end of the day, if I just literally drop the keys on the desk and figuratively, like the wrestlers leave their sneakers in the middle of the mat, if I leave my clogs in the middle of the floor and I walk off, I'll be fine. I'll be totally, totally content. Don't get me wrong. I'd like a little bite of that private equity pie. Who wouldn't? But the culture and the creation of the culture is both the most important thing and the most difficult thing. And once achieving the culture that you really, really desired, there just can't be a better way to practice any kind of medicine, especially ophthalmology.
Beautiful. What a great way to end this podcast. And I hope that we get some people fired up to go into private practice. Preeya, we got to thank you. I know how busy and slammed you are. You're amazing for hopping on with us for this half hour to talk about your journey, what's been going on. And everybody's rooting for you. Not that you need it. You're already kicking ass. So thank you for doing what you do. Darrell, you're the man. I'm looking forward to our next couple of episodes together. Thanks for everyone for listening to this episode of Ophthalmology Off the Grid. Thank you to Preeya for joining Darrell and I for this episode of Ophthalmology Off the Grid. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in. Until next time, this has been Ophthalmology Off the Grid.